On the Soul and the Resurrection by Saint Gregory of Nyssa. Then, after a moment's reflection on the meaning of these latter words, I said, I think that a contradiction now arises between what you have said and the result of our former examination of the passions. For if on the one hand the activity of such movements within us is to be held as arising from our kinship with the brutes, such movements, I mean, as were enumerated in our previous discussion, anger, for instance, and fear, desire of pleasure, and so on. And, on the other hand, it was affirmed that virtue consists in the good employment of these movements, and vice in their bad employment. And in addition to this we discussed the actual contribution of each of the other passions to a virtuous life, and found that through desire above all we were brought nearer to God, drawn up by its chain, as it were, from earth towards Him. I think that that part of the discussion is in a way opposed to that which we are now aiming at. How so? She asked. Why, when every unreasoning instinct is quenched within us after our purgation, this principle of desire will not exist any more than the other principles, and this being removed, it looks as if the striving after the better way would also cease, no other emotion remaining in the soul that can stir us up to the appetence of good. To that objection, she replied, we answer this. The speculative and critical faculty is the property of the soul's godlike part, for it is by these that we grasp the deity also. If then, whether by forethought here or by purgation hereafter, our soul becomes free from any emotional connection with the brute creation, there will be nothing to impede its contemplation of the beautiful. For this last is essentially capable of attracting in a certain way every being that looks toward it. If then the soul is purified of every vice, it will most certainly be in the sphere of beauty. The deity is in very substance beautiful, and to the deity the soul will, in its state of purity, have affinity, and the soul will embrace Him as like itself. Whenever this happens, then, there will be no longer any need of the impulse of desire to lead the way to the beautiful. Whoever passes his time in darkness, he it is who will be under the influence of a desire for the light. But whenever he comes into the light, then enjoyment takes the place of desire, and the power to enjoy renders desire useless and out of date. It will therefore be no detriment to our participation in the good that the soul should be free from such emotions, and turning back upon herself, should know herself accurately what her actual nature is, and should behold the original beauty reflected in the mirror and figure of her own beauty. For truly herein consists the real assimilation to the divine, in making our own life in some degree a copy of the Supreme Being. For a nature like that which transcends all thought, and is far removed from all that we observe within ourselves, proceeds in its existence in a very different manner to what we do in this present life. Man, possessing a constitution whose law it is to be moving, is carried in that particular direction whither the impulse of his will directs, and so his soul is not affected in the same way toward what lies before it. as one may say, as to what it has left behind. For hope leads the forward movement, but it is memory that succeeds that movement when it has advanced to the attainment of the hope. And if it is to something intrinsically good that hope thus leads on the soul, the print that this exercise of the will leaves upon the memory is a bright one. But if hope has seduced the soul with some phantom only of the good, and the excellent way has been missed, then the memory that succeeds what has happened becomes shame, and an internal war is thus waged in the soul between memory and hope, because the last has been such a bad leader of the will. Such, in fact, is the state of mind that shame gives expression to. The soul is stung, as it were, at the result. Its remorse for its ill-considered attempt is a whip that makes it feel to the quick, and it would bring in oblivion to its aid against its tormentor. Now, in our case, nature, owing to its being indigent of the good, is aiming always at this which is still wanting to it. And this aiming at a thing still missing is this very habit of desire, which our constitution displays equally, whether it is balked of the real good, or wins that which it is good to win. But a nature that surpasses every idea that we can form of the good, and transcends all other power, being in no want of anything that can be regarded as good, is itself the fullness of every good. It does not move in the sphere of the good by way of participation in it only, but it is itself the substance of the good, whatever we imagine the good to be. It neither gives scope for any rising hope, for hope manifests activity in the direction of something absent. But what a man has, why does he yet hope for it? As the Apostle asks. Nor is it in want of the activity of the memory for the knowledge of things. That which is actually seen has no need of being remembered. Since then this divine nature is beyond any particular good, and to the good is an object of love, it follows that when the divine nature looks within itself, it wishes for what it contains, and contains what it wishes, and admits nothing external. Indeed, there is nothing external to the divine nature, with the sole exception of evil, which, strange as it may seem to say, possesses existence in not existing at all. For there is no other origin of evil except the negation of what exists, and the truly existent forms the substance of the good. That, therefore, which is not to be found in the existent must be in the non-existent. Whenever the soul, then, having divested itself of the multifarious emotions incident to its nature, gets its divine form, and, mounting above desire, enters within that towards which it was once incited by that desire, it offers no harbor within itself, either for hope or memory. It holds the object of the one, the other is extruded from the consciousness by its occupation in enjoying all that is good. And thus the soul copies the life that is above, and is conformed to the peculiar features of the divine nature. None of its habits are left to it except that of love, which clings by natural affinity to the beautiful. For this is what love is, the inherent affection towards a chosen object. When, then, the soul, having become simple and single in form, and so perfectly godlike, finds that perfectly simple and immaterial good, which is really worth enthusiasm and love, it attaches itself to the good and blends with it by means of the movement and activity of love, fashioning itself according to that which it is continually finding and grasping, becoming by this assimilation to the good all that the nature of that which it participates is. The soul will consequently, owing to there being no lack of any good in that thing itself in which it participates, be itself also in no lack of anything. And so it will expel from within the activity and the habit of desire. For desire arises only when the thing missed is not found. For this teaching, we have the authority of God's own apostle, who announces a subduing and a ceasing of all other activities, even for the good, which are within us, and finds no limit for love alone. Prophecies, he says, shall fail, forms of knowledge shall cease, but charity never fails, which is equivalent to its always being as it is. And though he says that faith and hope have endured so far by the side of love, yet again he prolongs love's date beyond theirs, and with good reason too. For hope is in operation only so long as the enjoyment of the things hoped for is not to be had, and faith in the same way is a support in the uncertainty about the things hoped for so he defines it, the substance of things hoped for. But when the thing hoped for actually comes, then all other faculties are reduced to quiescence, and love alone remains active, finding nothing to succeed itself. Love, therefore, is the foremost of all excellent achievements, and the first of the commandments of the law. If ever then the soul reach this goal, it will be in no need of anything else. It will embrace that plenitude of things which are, whereby alone it seems in any way to preserve within itself the stamp of God's actual blessedness. For the life of the Supreme Being is love, seeing that the beautiful is necessarily lovable to those who recognize it. And the Deity does recognize it, and so this recognition becomes love, that which he recognizes being essentially beautiful. This true beauty, the insolence of satiety cannot touch, and no satiety, interrupting this continuous capacity to love the beautiful. God's life will have its activity in love, which life is thus in itself beautiful, and is essentially of a loving disposition toward the beautiful, and receives no check to this activity of love. In fact, in the beautiful, no limit is to be found, so that love should have to cease with any limit of the beautiful. This last can be ended only by its opposite. But when you have a good as here, which is in its essence incapable of changing for the worse, then that good will go on unchecked into infinity. Moreover, as every being is capable of attracting its like. And humanity is in a way like God, as bearing within itself some resemblances to its prototype. The soul is by a strict necessity attracted to the kindred deity. In fact, what belongs to God must by all means and at any cost be preserved for him. If then, on the one hand, the soul is unencumbered with superfluities, and no trouble connected with the body presses it down, its advance towards him who draws it to himself is sweet and congenial. But suppose, on the other hand, that the soul has been transfixed with the nails of propension, so as to be held down to a habit connected with material things. A case like that of those in the ruins caused by earthquakes, whose bodies are crushed by mounds of rubbish. And let us imagine, by way of illustration, that these are not only pressed down by the weight of the ruins, but have been pierced as well with spikes and splinters discovered with them in the rubbish. What then would be naturally the plight of those bodies when they were being dragged by relatives from the ruins to receive the holy rites of burial? Mangled and torn entirely, disfigured in the most direful manner conceivable, with the nails beneath the heap harrowing them by the very violence necessary to pull them out. Such, I think, is the plight of the soul as well, when the divine force, for God's very love of man, drags that which belongs to him from the ruins of the irrational and material. Not in hatred or revenge for a wicked life, to my thinking, does God bring upon sinners those painful dispensations. He is only claiming and drawing to himself whatever came into existence to please him. But while he, for a noble end, is attracting the soul to himself, the fountain of all blessedness, it is the occasion necessarily to the being so attracted of a state of torture, just as those who refine gold from the dross which it contains not only get this base dross to melt in the fire, but are obliged to melt the pure gold along with the alloy. And then, while this last is being consumed, the gold remains. So, while evil is being consumed in the purgatorial fire, the soul that is welded to this evil must inevitably be in the fire too, until the spurious material alloy is consumed and annihilated by this fire. If a clay of a more tenacious kind is deeply plastered round a rope, and then the end of the rope is put through a narrow hole, and then someone on the further side violently pulls it by that end, the result must be that while the rope itself obeys the force exerted, the clay that has been plastered upon it is scraped off it with this violent pulling, and is left outside the hole. And moreover is the cause why the rope does not run easily through the passage, but has to undergo a violent tension at the hands of the puller. In such a manner, I think, we may figure to ourselves the agonized struggle of that soul which has wrapped itself up in earthy material passions, when God is drawing it, his own one, to himself. and the foreign matter which has somehow grown into its substance has to be scraped from it by main force, and so occasions the soul that keen, intolerable anguish. Then it seems, I said, that it is not punishment, chiefly and principally, that the deity as judge afflicts sinners with, but he operates, as your argument has shown, only to get the good separated from the evil, and to attract the good within the communion of blessedness. That, said the teacher, is my meaning, and also that the agony will be measured by the amount of evil there is in each individual. For it would not be reasonable to think that the man who has remained so long as we have supposed in evil known to be forbidden, and that the man who has fallen only into moderate sins should be tortured to the same amount in the judgment upon their vicious habits, but according to the quantity of material will be the longer or shorter time that agonizing flame will be burning. That is, as long as there is fuel to feed it. In the case of the man who has acquired a heavy weight of material, the consuming fire must necessarily be very searching. But where that which the fire has to feed upon has spread less far, there the penetrating fierceness of the punishment is mitigated, so far as the object itself, in the amount of its evil, is diminished. In any and every case, evil must be removed out of existence, so that, as we said above, the absolutely non-existent should cease to be at all. Since it is not in its nature that evil should exist outside the will, does it not follow that when it shall be that every will rests in God, evil will be reduced to complete annihilation, owing to no receptacle being left for it? End of Part 8 of On the Soul and the Resurrection.